Hello everyone, hello Pastor Juan.
Hey Jackson.
As we promised last week, we're back again together today for another episode of Gospel Minded. How are you doing, Pastor Juan?
Doing good. Yeah, it has been a great week. We've had some great weather. Been able to work with some people on some outdoor landscaping type stuff. We've been seeing 80s and 90s and just enjoying this heat for New York State. That's rare, right, Jackson?
Yes. I really love it. I love it.
So yeah, it's been exciting to get into this season and start with this topic, and we're looking at who Jesus is. And so I just want to ask our viewers this afternoon, what do you think of when you hear the name Jesus? So what comes to mind first? What pops into your head? And then maybe a question beyond that. What are the people around you? Maybe friends, family, maybe your coworkers, young people, older people. What do they think of? What's their first reaction when they hear the word Jesus, the name Jesus? What are some of the things they might be thinking? And we want to look at who Jesus is. Actually, you and Matthew had a chance to go on the street and ask some people, who is Jesus? More related to the question of, when you hear the word Jesus, when you hear the name Jesus, what do you think of? What does it bring to mind? What are some of the things you learned, Jackson?
Oh yes, definitely, Pastor. I must tell you first that I have never ceased to be amazed that Jesus Christ is one of the most, if not the most polarizing figure of the entire history of mankind. He's so controversial. And we have people, they think Jesus was a good teacher, was a good man. And we have some people, they really think Jesus was God. And other people thought Jesus was only, you use the name of Jesus when you swear.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have a variety of like always, a variety of answers.
Yeah, across the spectrum, right? All kinds of different answers. And I just want to thank everyone who's willing to participate, because it's just so helpful to get many perspectives. Jesus, we're looking at Jesus, and we're going to come from a biblical perspective. We're going to look at the Bible, but we want to know what people think, because it's so important to see who the real Jesus is, and often what we think about Jesus may not be who he really is. So yeah, there was a lot of answers across the spectrum. Some focused on what Jesus did, and got a lot of the perspective right. Some of the things he taught, some of the character that he had, compassion, love, treating your neighbor like you'd like to be treated, and some of the things that people know about who Jesus is. And some of the people that were willing to answer our questions talked about the Bible. Some talked about Sunday school, their upbringing. Some tied Jesus to Christmas and to Easter, to his death as the Son of God, as you mentioned, Jackson. Often, though, what people think of the most is religion. Jesus as a religious symbol, a religious leader, the rituals, the rules that surround religion. And what's interesting is Jesus was a polarizing figure, not just today, right? Many different viewpoints on who Jesus is. Jesus asked the same question back in his day, and he was a polarizing figure from the very beginning. Some wanted Jesus to be the Messiah who would give Israel freedom from Rome. And others saw him as a prophet. Some argued he was a good teacher. Some saw him as a rebel. Some saw him as a man, some supernatural. There's just wide-ranging viewpoints on who Jesus was in his time on earth. And today is the same thing. And so Jesus looked at his disciples one day, and he asked them the question, who do you say I am? Right? And that's why we're looking at this. And that really may be the presupposition in my mind, just coming to this entire season and this focus on Jesus and what is the good news. Who do you say that I am? Jesus asks the question, every single one of us has to answer that. In our culture, there's so many different answers. But what will matter for us is what our answer is. And if we don't have the right information, if we don't know who Jesus really is, how can we answer the question? And so it's a critical question, what we think and what we believe about Jesus. And so as you were talking with people, interacting with them, just getting to know their beliefs, what are some of the things you learned, Jackson?
Yes, I think my biggest takeaway was Jesus was a historical figure, that he had certain positive influence.
Yeah. So some of us may accept that there is a true historical person 2,000 years ago, and maybe some of us say, well, some of that teaching is good, and some of it is beneficial for us, and we can choose what we want to live and what we don't want to live, and if it's helpful, I'll do it, and that type of thing. So there is some acceptance of this idea that Jesus was a person that did live, and a wide-ranging viewpoints on what that actually is. So we'll touch on some of that, but there's often, I think, in viewing a lot of those conversations, many people, maybe some of the people viewing today, almost universal consensus that Jesus was historical. Now the not so sure thing is who Jesus really was. Who's the real Jesus? Can we know? Maybe can we know who the real Jesus is? And so that's an important question. Can we know who Jesus is? And it was challenging to me as I heard answers and got to know people through some of those interactions, that often the who we think we know Jesus is was impacted by religion. Okay, really tied to the idea of how was I brought up, how was I influenced by my church, how I was influenced by religious systems, and often that did not equate to current faith.
Yes.
So maybe that was in my past, and that's what I know of Jesus, and often it went back to the idea of, well, he's a religious figure, he's religious, and that's that whole religion thing, and I don't think I quite buy that, and it really impacted my growing up, but it doesn't impact where I am today. Another question you were able to ask is, if Jesus was historical, so if he did exist, how has he impacted? Do you really think he's impacted culture and history? And again, the answers often went back to religion. Religion impacted, and because Jesus was a religious figure and religion attached itself to Jesus, that over time religion impacted the culture, religion impacted then governments, religion impacted laws, and so yeah, it impacts me, but it doesn't impact me personally, right? Many people have that concept. Jesus doesn't impact me personally, but yeah, he's impacted me because he impacted everything, but it's because of religion. Okay, and I think a lot of the feeling, some may view that as positive impact, and many people probably view that as negative impact. But is that something you can relate to, Jackson? The idea that religion has impacted the culture, and religion is how many people see who Jesus is. That's how they view Jesus.
Oh yeah, definitely, Pastor. And my impression is the association that people usually have between Jesus and religion is basically based on some past experiences, bad experiences, bad personal experiences, and misinformation.
Yeah, so maybe in Jackson's understanding, and I agree, when we really know who the real Jesus is, it's going to impact us differently. It'll make a more personal impact than a religious system. Our just in disclosure, Jackson and I have a biblical presupposition. So we're Jesus followers.
Yeah.
We believe Jesus was historical, and not just historical, that He is God. He came to earth to love us. And we are Christians. We trust in Jesus. And we want others to know about Jesus. We believe it's important. But we don't want others to know religion. And Jesus, even when he came to earth, he stood against religion. He stood against the religious system. He wanted people to know him. And that's exactly what we want as well. And so we want to get back to who really is Jesus. Can we know who Jesus is? And then how does that impact us? But as you mentioned, what most people see of Jesus is what they see from Christians, or they see from people who take the name of Jesus, or from a religious system that claims Jesus. And the problem is that when we live and we act like Jesus did, well, that's a good positive impact. But Christians aren't perfect. So often, we don't give a full representation of Jesus, do we? We're imperfect people. And I don't think that's the full problem, though, okay? I think most people understand that everybody's imperfect. None of us are perfect. And the trouble comes in, and I think has been over the last, definitely my lifetime, and I guess I can only speak to that. The trouble is that often Christians try to say they're perfect. They try to act perfect, and then what they try to do is they end up judging other people that do things differently from them, and they judge them as imperfect, and they try to say that they're perfect. And religion is what creates a standard to show goodness, to show worthiness. And then the trouble is religion is used to judge other people. And that's not what Jesus came for. That's not what he wanted. Jesus actually says, I did not come to condemn the world. And how often has religion condemned? How often have Christians created a standard and then judged others by the standard that they couldn't even live up to themselves, that I can't live up to myself. I can only know God because God loves me and gave me grace, something I didn't deserve. And religion is something that humanity has used to try and get to God. It tends to prop people up to say that I can attain what religion says I need to do, and I can judge other people that don't attain that, right? I can try to get to God by stepping up steps, or attaining good works, or doing enough, or this is how I get to God. But that's not what Jesus came for. And actually, if Jesus is seen through the eyes of religion, we end up having a very distorted view of what Jesus is. We end up having a Jesus that I am not surprised many people don't want to know. And that's sad. We end up not really having the true person of who Jesus is. Some of the people that you and Matthew were able to talk to came down to the concept of I don't really like what I see religion says of Jesus, but maybe the guy Jesus. I remember one of the ladies said, I think he was probably a pretty cool guy. Jesus was an amazing guy. He'd be the cool guy. But he's the guy that stood against the system and said what really matters is the person. What really matters is the person.
Then religion is certainly not the answer. It looks like religion is one of the problems with how the world views Jesus, right?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jackson. And that's something that we can talk about. What religion has communicated about Jesus, and what do people see about Jesus because of religion? And maybe that's something I think we can kind of drill in on. What do you think people now see of Jesus and they associate with Jesus because of religion?
Oh yeah, I think you just mentioned a list of them. hypocrisy, lack of love, bad testimony, and inconsistency with the biblical Jesus that we preach, because
Okay.
we're preaching God, and if we're not displaying God's love, we're not, people see hypocrisy, like you say, we're not perfect, and we have to be we have to be willing to admit that, and that we need Jesus to transform our life every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're willing to admit that, I think it changes the conversation. When we say we're Jesus followers and look at us. No. We're Jesus followers, look at Jesus. Look at him, because we cannot, we don't attain to who he is, and what little by little we want to get more and more like him, because he's the guy. Less of us, more of Jesus. And when that's the perspective, things change. But religion has given us, in some sense, an image of who Jesus is. How many of us look back in the past and have this picture in our mind of this white guy with long hair and a beard, and this particular white guy? I mean, there was a very famous picture that's
We have people who mention that to us.
yeah, in some of the and yet Jesus would have been a Jewish guy with darker skin, with maybe curly hair and a certain, probably a beard, but we don't know what he looked like. And yet many people are going to have this religious symbol. How many people are impacted by the rituals of religion? And Jesus looked at the woman at the well in the book of John and said, no, it's not going to be about the place. It's not going to be about the building. It's not going to be about the ritual. It'll be about your heart before God. Many people look at the rules of religion, and often the rules are based on preferences, and I think that's so disappointing when people get around to the idea, well, you've got this set of rules, and it didn't come from what Jesus said. You just made them up. Or at least that's what they think. I mean, there might have been good motivation between all these religious things.
Yeah, of course, because Jesus challenged them and says, this is what you did. You made it up. It's not what God wanted to communicate when he gave his laws to Moses.
Right. Yeah, so they'd take a law of Moses, like the Sabbath law, and then they'd create other laws around it so that they didn't break the Sabbath law. So I can only go 1,000 steps on Sabbath. Or I'm working, or I can't light a candle on Sabbath, and there's these laws that they built around it. People, we do that today. Religion has done that today. You're not going to find Jesus saying wear a suit and a tie on Sunday to worship, and yet a religious system may take up a certain type of dress. You got to dress in this fashion. Well, that's a preference, and so some of these things come in and influence people, and they say, well, if it's all about man-made rules, I don't want anything to do with it, right? And they're impacted by the religion, maybe the expensive building or the cathedral, and they say, well, if it's all about that, if it's all about the pillars, if it's all about the gold and the shimmer and the glass and the robes, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. They look back into history and they say, well, what about the Crusades? What about the wars? What about the hate that is all associated with one group saying it has to be this way because of holiness versus one group that says, I don't agree, and there's a war over it. Well, how can that come from Jesus? And yet they view Jesus through the viewpoint of religion. Or the televangelist on TV that says, send me your money and you're going to have wealth and God's blessing and all this. And again, they view Jesus through the religious symbol, and see it as religion manipulating. Well, if Jesus is tied to that, I don't have anything to do with him. And it affects how people view who Jesus really is. So people are affected, their viewpoint is affected by all of those religious things. But what do you think, Jackson? Did Jesus come to create that image? do any of those things that I just talked about represent Jesus?
Sadly, no. Sadly, no. Definitely no.
Yeah, and too often religion kind of points to themselves, builds their own kingdom, but Jesus wanted people to have a relationship with him, to know who he really was. That people that followed him, Jesus followers, would point to Jesus, not point to the church, not point to the religion, not point to building their system, but instead point to the person of Jesus. That we would preach Christ, that we would preach Jesus. And so we want to drill down. So in this season, we really want to drill down on who Jesus really is. And then what has he done, and how has that impacted the world around that? How does that impact me? And one of the best ways to do that, or begin to do that, is to kind of look at the eyewitnesses. What did the people who knew Jesus the most, what did they say about him? And we can look at his followers. Many of them wrote letters to talk about who Jesus was. They kind of left a record. And we see that in the Bible. Disciples, Matthew writes about Jesus. He writes about his friend. Mark writes about Jesus, and Mark was connected to Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. And so Mark kind of writes down what Peter said about Jesus. Luke, he went around, he talked to many different witnesses that knew Jesus. And so he writes a record. He's really trying to be a historian. And Luke goes around and he spends years digging into the eyewitness records to leave us a record of who Jesus is from the people who knew him the best. John, one of Jesus' closest friends, writes a record so that we could see who Jesus really was, who he is. And so we want to go into that. And what you'll see in these accounts is they don't sugarcoat it. They do not write in a way to try and impress the culture they were from. In fact, they angered the culture they were from by just presenting who Jesus really was and who he is. And so they go back to seeing the real Jesus. And so that's what we want to do. We want to go back to not see what religion says about Jesus. We want to see, what did Jesus' own friends say about Jesus? What did the eyewitnesses say about Jesus? Who is Jesus? We may deal with some other historical accounts beyond the Bible that talk about and give us some points of history, and it backs up what his disciples said about Jesus as well.
Yeah. Now let's wrap up with one example of what Jesus' followers said.
Sure. Yeah. Just a simple example. Paul the apostle, and I love Paul because he was a religious zealot. Like he bought into Judaism, line and sinker. He was all in, so much so that he becomes the terrorist killing Christians. He's the Christian killer because he was all in on the religious system. And he believed that the people that were following Jesus were destroying the religious system that he held as true and as holy. And he lived the religious rules. He lived them to the end extent. He was the best of the best. He had it all together. He was the conservative. He was the perfectionist. He was all in for religion. And so he believes Jesus is destroying all that. And so he goes against the Christians and he kills Christians. He's that religious zealot until he meets Jesus. Mm-hmm. And when he meets the person of Jesus, it's all changed. And so Paul says this about Jesus. He gives us his testimony, and he says, Jesus is God the Son. Paul says he loved me, and he gave himself for me.
Yeah, so love is such a critical part of who Jesus is, his purpose, and how he relates to others.
Yeah, it is. And I love the people that we were able to talk with, the people around us. And one of the things, you get stripped of religion away, many people still have the concept that Jesus was a compassionate, loving person. Mm-hmm. And sadly, they don't see that in religion. but they still can see that in Jesus. And I want to look at the person of Jesus and see.
Yeah, because basically religion is that you have to meet certain qualification in order to, so they can accept you.
I love the parable Jesus teaches to say, I'm going to leave the 99 religious people, and I'm going to go after the one person that's lost. And I want the broken. I want to love the person that's hurting. I want to love the person that's needy. And Jesus reaches out with grace. Religion says, do this to attain somehow to get to God. And Jesus says, no, grace, love, forgiveness, and he's willing to reach out to us. And so totally different perspective. And Paul says that and writes it in one of his letters, Galatians chapter 2, and he just says, Jesus is God the Son, he loved me, and he gave himself for me. And that just gives who Jesus is in that short testimony. And we'll be able to look at so much more than that one testimony. So, and as you mentioned, love. Love is such a critical aspect of who Jesus is and what he taught. And so Jesus would even teach in John 17, he was very close to the point where he would go to the cross and die. And he taught that how people would know true followers of him was by their love. And yet religion often says works, not love. And so I'm not surprised that people don't know Jesus because of religion. And if they know Jesus only through religion, they get a very distorted viewpoint of who Jesus is. Jesus came in love, and he said that we would be known. So people that follow him would be known because of our love. And when that fails, right, we need to be honest and say, I blew it. That is not who Jesus is. Let me decrease, let him increase. Let's focus on who the real person of Jesus is. And I want to be more like him. I apologize for my failure, and help me to be more like him. So he gives such a contrast from what Jesus says to the culture around us, and even to the religious culture around us as well. That he wouldn't be known by religion. Jesus said, no, you're going to be known by, if you're my follower, you'll be known because of your love, not by your religious system, not by trying to be perfect, not by trying to judge people, right? None of those things are going to point people to Jesus, not judgment, not perfection, not even theology, not great speeches, not rules, not great works. None of that's going to indicate who a follower of Jesus is, but your love. That will indicate a follower of Jesus. Not great sacrifice, not great articulation of a whole bunch of amazing truths. No, love. Love will indicate who Jesus is, or who his followers are. And sadly, religion often is not led by love. And often religion pushes their power and their control, and that messes up the picture of who Jesus is. And when we have a messed up picture of who Jesus is, then it ruins his impact. And so let's drill down in on who Jesus is.
Very good, Pastor. Now, do you have any literature recommendations for us?
Sure. Yeah. Here's a great resource. It's a book by Philip Yancey. It's The Jesus I Never Knew. And so what he's doing is he's saying he was impacted greatly by a religious view of Jesus. And he looks at that viewpoint and says, that wasn't the real Jesus. And he starts asking the hard questions. He asks the difficult questions and says, who is the real Jesus? Let's not Sunday school quote who Jesus is. Let's not kind of whitewash it. Let's get into the real person with the real emotions, with the real situations, and who was the real Jesus. And he has some great questions. A little older book now, but very impactful to just try and say, let's strip away the religion. And he'll look at all the different things that religion has crowded in and discolored the true view. Let's strip that away and get back to the real Jesus. Jesus is. So excellent resource, and just ask some real good questions that I think our culture is asking, that I need to ask, that each of us need to ask. Because what really matters is, who do we say Jesus is? What do we believe? And that can only be valid based on knowing the real person. You can't have true belief without knowing the real person of Jesus.
Yes, definitely, very good. Now, do you have any way to wrap up this for us, or what are we supposed to expect for next time, next episode?
Yeah, we're gonna just begin to look at some of the testimony from John, one of Jesus' closest disciples, and look a little bit at what John says about Jesus.
All right, definitely. Thank you, Pastor, for your time and your insight, and thank you, everyone, for watching.